꾸준한 영어 테드쌤입니다. 자, 오늘은 여러분 군소리 하지 말고 바로 틀려도 좋으니까 계속 읽어나가는 방식으로 해서 끝까지 한번 듣고 따라하는 섀도우 리딩 해보도록 하겠습니다. Bunnicula Chapter 1 The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid these now tired old eyes on our visitor. I had been left home by the family with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think it's their way of making up for not taking me with them, as if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and stare at the screens. And the people think you're being impolite if you fall asleep and start to snore and scratch yourself in public. No, thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about the first night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows, and the wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chapter was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he'd taken out as his own. I saw that once again he'd covered the whole seat with his cat hair, and I chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there's nothing that frightens Chapter more than the vacuum cleaner. In the midst of this reverie, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and see who it was. I knew it had to be my family, the Monroes, since it was just the time to be over. After a moment, the front door flew open. There they stood on the doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and its glare. I noticed that Mr. Monroe was carrying a little bundle with tiny, glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking at the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad." "Take your boots off, you're soaking wet," replied his mother, somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. "But Mom, what about—" "First, stop dripping on the carpet." Would somebody like to take this? "I'd like to remove my coat." "I will," Pete yelled. "No, I will," said Toby. "I found them. You drop it." "I'll not. You too." "Mom, Pete punched me." "I'll take him," said Mrs. Monroe. "Take off your coat this minute." But she became so involved in helping the boys out of their coats, since she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one had even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. "Harold," cried Toby, "guess what happened to me?" And then all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel like I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with a greater respect of his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everyone happens to them to explain it to us. It's never been just, "Good boy, Harold, good boy," or "Use the little box Chapter at our house." Oh no, with us it's, "Hey, Harold, the dad got a raise and now we are in a higher tax bracket." Or, "Come sit on the bed, Chapter, and watch this Wild Kingdom show. Maybe you'll see a relative." Which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Monroe is a college professor and Mrs. Monroe is a lawyer. So we think of it as a rather special household. And we are therefore a rather special house pet. And so it wasn't at all surprising to me that they took the time to explain strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of a little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the pit of the audience already seated, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly, and they wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who's the little one, sprang up from his chair and screamed that he had said something. Mr. Monroe told him to stop making a fuss and move to another seat. But in an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what he had said. An usher came over to their row to shush them, and Mr. Munro borrowed his flashlight. What they found under Toby's chair was the little blanket bundle that was now sitting on Mr. Munro's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, but they were also unable to decipher them because they were a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer for a better look. Now, most people might call me a mongrel, but I have some pretty fancy bloodlines running through these veins, and Russian wolfhound happened to be one of them. Because my family got around a lot, I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell if it was a note from a bereaved mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. The little guy was shivering from fear and cold. It was decided that Mr. Munro and the boys would make a house for him, out of an old crate and some heavy-duty wire mesh from garage. For the night, the boys would make the bed for him in the shoebox. Toby and Pete ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Munro went to the kitchen to get some milk and lettuce. Mr. Munro sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he were wondering how he became to sitting on his own living room in the wet raincoat and the strange. And the two of us casually moseyed over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think rabbits like milk," he answered. Chatter and I were unable to continue our conversation because a deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Ma, Toby's broke the rabbit's house." "I didn't, I just dropped it. Peter wanted me to carry it. It's too big. Toby's too little. I'm none, you are two." "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Munro called out as she entered with the milk and lettuce. "Let's try to get it in here with as little hysteria as possible, please." Chatter turned to me and said under his breath, "That lettuce looks repulsive. That if there any milk left, I get it." I certainly wasn't going to argue with him. I was a moral man myself. At that moment, the crate arrived, barely standing the strain of being pulled two directions at once. "Ma, Toby said he's going to keep the rabbit in his room. That's not fair. Harold sleeps in his room." Only sometimes, I thought, when I know he's got a leftover ham sandwich in his drawer. Toby's a nice kid, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't hurt that he shared his stash with me. It was, after all, one of the late-night parties in the Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake. And Toby, noting my preference, has kept me chocolate cake ever since. Pete, on the other hand, it doesn't believe in sharing. And the only time he tried to sleep on his bed, he rolled over on me and pinned me by my ears, and so that I couldn't move from the rest of the night. I could crick on my neck. But he's mine. I found him. You sat on him, you mean? I found him. He's sleeping in my room. You can keep smelling Harold in your room and chatter to, but if you want to. But I want to keep the rabbit in my room. Smelly or Harold. I would have bitten his ankle, but I knew he hadn't changed the soccer for a week. Smelly indeed. Mr. Munro spoke up. "I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room on that table by the window. It's a light there. He got lots of fresh air." Peter taller than I am," Toby cried. "He'll be able to see the rabbit better." "Too bad, Squirt." "Okay," said Mrs. Munro, through clenched teeth. "Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and then we can all get some sleep." "Why?" Peter asked. "I don't want to go to sleep." Mrs. Munro smiled a little sweetly at Pete. "Look, Ma," said Toby. "He's not drinking his milk." Chatter nudged me in the ribs. "Didn't I kill you? Excuse me while I make myself available." "Hey," said Toby, "we got a name?" "Can that wait until tomorrow?" asked Mr. Munro. The boys shouted in unison. "No, he has to have him right now." I have to say I agreed with them. It took them 3 days to name me, and those were the 3 most anxious days in my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really going to call me Fluffy, as Mrs. Munro had suggested. "Well, all right," sighed Mrs. Munro. What about, oh, say, Bonbon? Uh-oh, there she goes again, I thought. Where does she get them? Yuck, we all said. Well then, how about Fluffy? She offered hopefully. Peter looked at his mother and smiled. You never give up, do you, Ma? Meanwhile, Chatter, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Munro and the ankles and purring loudly. No, Chatter, no, she said, pushing him aside. He wanted to help us name him, don't you, Chatter? Toby asked, as he scooped him up in his arms. Chatter shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he had in mind. Come on, Harold. You've got to help name him too. I joined the family and serious thinking began. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I've really seen him. So, this is your rabbit, I thought. He sort of looks like a Chester, only he got longer ears and a shorter tail, and a motor in his nose. Well, said Pete after a moment, since we found him at the movie, why don't we call him Mr. Johnson? There was a moment of silence. Who's Mr. Johnson? Asked Toby. The guy who owns the movie theater, Peter answered. No one seemed to like the idea. How about the prince? Said Mrs. Monroe. Mr. Monroe said, Dad, are you kidding? Well, I had a dog named the Prince once, he replied lamely. Prince, I thought. That's a silly name for a dog. We found him in the Dracula movie. Let's call him Dracula, Toby said. That's a stupid name, said Pete. No, it's not. And anyway, I found him, so I should get to name him. Mom, you're not going to let him name him, are you? That's a favoritism, and I will be traumatized if you do. Mrs. Monroe looked in wonder at Pete. Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please, please, please. And with each please, he squeezed the Chatter a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the bowl of milk and moved toward the kitchen. Chatter followed her every move with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, Let's not have any more argument. We will compromise. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie. So we'll call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula. That should make everybody happy, including me. What about me? Muttered the Chatter. I won't be happy though she puts down that milk. Is that okay with you? She asked. Toby and Peter looked at one another, and smile that grew on Toby's face. Yeah, Ma, I think that name is just right. Pete shrugged. It's okay, but I get to fit in. Okay, I'm going to put the milk back in the fridge. Maybe he will drink it tomorrow. What about Chester? Toby said, dropping the printed cat to the floor. Maybe he would like it. Chester made a beeline for Mrs. Monroe and looked up at her plaintively. Oh, Chester doesn't want any more milk, do you, Chester? You've already had your milk today. She reached down and patted Chester on his head and walked into the kitchen. Chester didn't move. Okay, bedtime, said Mrs. Monroe. Good night, Bunnicula, Toby said. Good night, Count Bunnicula, Pete said sarcastically, and what I took to be his attempt at a Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought I saw a flicker of movement from the cage. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. I licked Toby good night. Good night, smelly Harold. Good night, dumb Chester. I drew down Pete's foot. Mom, Harold drew down my foot. Good night, Pete, Mrs. Monroe said with greater finality when she came back into the living room. Then more calmly, Good night, Harold. Good night, Chester. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe went up the stairs together. You know, dear, Mr. Monroe said, that was very clever. But Nicola, I could never have thought of a name like that. Oh, I don't know, Robert. She smiled. She put her arm through his. I think the princess is a lovely name too. The room was quiet. Chatter was sitting in the closed door state in the shop. Slowly he turned to me. I wish they had named him Fluffy, was all he said. 네, 두 번째 도전하겠습니다. Bunnicula. Chapter 1. The Arrival. I shall never forget the first time I laid this now tied old eyes on our return. I'd been left home by the family with the admonition to take care of the house until they returned. That's something they always say to me when they go out. Take care of the house, Harold. You are the watchdog. I think it's their way of making up for not taking me with them, as if I wanted to go anyway. You can't lie down at the movies and still see the screen. And people think you're being impolite if you fall asleep and start to snore or scratch yourself in public. No, thank you. I'd rather be stretched out on my favorite rug in front of a nice whistling radiator. But I digress. I was talking about that first night. Well, it was cold. The rain was pelting the windows, and the wind was howling, and it felt pretty good to be indoors. I was lying on the rug with my head on my paws, just staring absently at the front door. My friend Chatter was curled up on the brown velvet armchair, which years ago he staked out as his own. I saw that once again, his covered horse seat with his cat hair, and chuckled to myself, picturing the scene tomorrow. Next to grasshoppers, there is nothing that frightens Chatter more than the vacuum cleaner. In the midst of this reverie, I heard the car pull into the driveway. I didn't even bother to get up and see who it was. I knew it had to be my family, the Monroes. Since it was just about time the movie was to be over, after a moment, the front door flew open. There they stood at a doorway, Toby and Pete and Mom and Dad Monroe. There was a flash of lightning, and in its glare, I noticed that Mr. Monroe was carrying a bundle with tiny, glistening eyes. Pete and Toby bounded into the room, both talking about the top of their lungs. Toby shouted, "Put him over here, Dad!" "Take your boots off, you're soaking wet," replied his mother, somewhat calmly, I thought, under the circumstances. "But, Mom, what about—" "First, stop dripping on the carpet." "Would somebody like to take this?" asked Mr. Monroe, indicating the bundle with the eyes. "I'd like to remove my coat." "I will," Pete yelled. "No, I will," Pete said to me. "I found him." "You dropped him." "I will not." "You will too." "Mom, Pete punched me." "I will take him," said Mrs. Monroe. "Take off your coat this minute." But she became so involved in having the boy out of their coat, she didn't take him at all. My tranquil evening had been destroyed, and no one even said hello to me. I whimpered to remind them that I was there. "Harold," cried Toby, "guess what happened to me?" And then all over again, everyone started talking at once. At this point, I feel I must explain something. In our family, everyone treats everyone else with greater respect for his or her intelligence. That goes for the animals as well as the people. Everything that happens to them is explained to us. It's never been just, "Good boy, Harold," or "Use the little box Chatter" at our house. Oh no, with us it's, "Hey Harold, Dad got a raise and we are in a higher tax bracket. Come sit on the bed, Chatter, and watch this Wild Kingdom show. Maybe you will see a relative." Which shows just how thoughtful they are. But after all, Mr. Monroe is a college professor and Mrs. Monroe is a lawyer. So we think of it as a rather special household. And we are, therefore, rather special house pet. So it wasn't at all surprising to me they took the time to explain strange circumstances surrounding the arrival of the little bundle with the glistening eyes now among us. It seems that they had arrived at the theater late, and rather than trip over the pit of the audience already sitting, they decided to sit in the last row, which was empty. They tiptoed in and sat down very quietly and said wouldn't disturb anyone. Suddenly, Toby, who's the little one, sprang up from his chair and squealed that he had settled something. Mr. Monroe told him to stop making a fuss and to move to another seat. In an unusual display of independence, Toby said he wanted to see just what it was he had sat on. An usher came over to their row to shush them, and Mr. Monroe borrowed his flashlight. What they found under Toby's chair was the little blanket bundle that was now sitting on Mr. Monroe's lap. They now unwrapped the blanket, and there in the center was a tiny black and white rabbit, sitting in a shoebox filled with dirt. A piece of paper had been tied to his neck with a ribbon. There were words on the paper, but the Monroes were unable to decipher them because they were in a totally unfamiliar language. I moved closer for a better look. Now, most people might call me a mongrel, but I have some pretty fancy bloodlines running through these veins. Russian Warpanda happens to be one of them. Because my family got around a lot, I was able to recognize the language as an obscure dialect of the Carpathian Mountain region. Roughly translated, it read, "Take good care of my baby." But I couldn't tell if it was a note from the beloved mother or a piece of Romanian sheet music. The little guy was shivering from fear and cold. It was decided Mr. Munro and the boys went to make a house party with a house heavy-duty wire mesh from the garage with bed frame in the shoebox. Toby and Pete ran outside to find the crate, and Mrs. Munro went to the kitchen to get some milk and lettuce. Mr. Munro sat down, a dazed expression in his eyes, as if he were wondering how he became to be sitting in his own living room in a wet raincoat with a strange bunny on his lap. I signaled to Chatter, and the two of us casually moseyed over to a corner of the room. We looked at each other. "Well, what do you think?" I asked. "I don't think the rabbits like milk," he answered. Chatter and I were unable to continue our conversation because a deafening crash commanded our attention. Pete yelled from the hallway, "Mom, Toby broke the rabbit's house." "I didn't, I just dropped it. Pete won't me carry it. It's too big. Toby's too little." "I'm 9, you are 2. "Okay, fellas," Mrs. Munro called out as she entered the room with a milk and lettuce. Chatter turned to me and said under his breath, "That lettuce looks repulsive," as if there... I certainly wasn't going to argue with him. I'm a waterman myself. At that moment, the crate arrived, fairly standing the strain of full 2 directions at once. "Ma, Toby said he's going to keep the rabbit in his room. That's not fair. Harold sleeps in his room." Only sometimes I thought, when I know he's got a leftover ham sandwich in his drawer. Toby's a nice kid, don't get me wrong. But it doesn't hurt he shared his stash with me. It wasn't, after all, one of those late-night parties in Toby's room that I first developed my taste for chocolate cake. And Toby, noting my preference, has kept me in chocolate cake ever since. Pete, on the other hand, it doesn't believe in sherry. Only time I tried to sleep in his bed, he rolled over me and pinned me by my ears so that I couldn't move for the rest of the night. I creaked in my neck for the rest of the days. "But he's mine. I found him." "You sat on him, you mean." "I found him and he's sleeping in my room." "You can keep smelling old Harold in your room and Chester too if you want to, but I'm going to keep the rabbit in mine," Pete said. Smelly old Harold? I would have bitten his ankle, but I knew he hadn't changed his socks for a week. Smelly indeed. Mr. Monroe spoke up. "I think the best place for the rabbit is right here in the living room on that table by the window. It's right there. Who gets lots of fresh air." "Peter taller than I am," Peter cried. "We'll be able to see the rabbit better." "To bed, Skirt." "Okay," said Mrs. Monroe through the clenched teeth. "Let's put him to bed and make him comfortable, and then we can all get some sleep." "Why?" Peter asked. "I don't want to go to sleep." Mrs. Monroe smiled a little sweetly at Pete. "Look, Ma," said Toby. "He's not drinking his milk." Chatter nudged me in the ribs. "Didn't I tell you?" he asked. "Excuse me while I make myself available." "Hey," said Toby, "we gotta name him." "Can that wait until tomorrow?" asked Mr. Monroe. The boys shouted in unison. "No, he has to have a name right now." I have to say I agreed with them. It took them 3 days in naming me, and those were the 3 most anxious days of my life. I couldn't sleep at all, worrying that they were really gonna call me Fluffy, as Mrs. Monroe had suggested. "Well, all right," sighed Mrs. Monroe. "What about, say, Bum Bum?" Uh-oh, there she goes again, I thought. Where does she get them? Yuck, we all said. "Well then, how about Floppy?" she offered hopefully. Pete looked at his mother and smiled. "You never give up, do you, Ma?" Meanwhile, Chatter, who had also been named Fluffy for a short time, was rubbing against Mrs. Monroe's ankles and purring loudly. No, Chatter, not now, she said, pushing him aside. He wanted to help us name him, don't you, Chatter? Toby asked, as he scooped him up in his arms. Chatter shot me a look. I could tell this was not what he has in mind. Come on, Harold, Toby called. You've got to help name him too. I joined the family, and serious thinking began. We all peeled into the box. It was the first time I had really seen him. So, this is your rabbit, I thought. He sort of looks like a Chatter. He's got longer ears and a short tail, and a motor in his nose. Well, said Pete after a moment, since we found him at the movies, why don't we call him Mr. Johnson? There was a moment of silence. Who's Mr. Johnson? Asked Toby. The guy who owns the movie theater, Peter answered. No one seemed to like the idea. How about the prince? Said Mr. Monroe. Dad, said Toby, are you kidding? No, I had a dog named Prince once, he replied lamely. Prince, I thought, that's a silly name for a dog. We found him at a Dracula movie. Let's call him Dracula, Toby said. That's a stupid name, said Pete. No, it's not. And anyway, I found him, so I should get to name him. Mom, you're not gonna let him name you, are you? That's your favorite, and I'll be traumatized if you do. Mrs. Monroe looked at wonder at Pete. Please, Mom, please, Dad, let's name him Dracula, cried Toby. Please, please, please. And with each please, he squeezed the chest a little harder. Mrs. Monroe picked up the bowl of milk and moved toward the kitchen. Chatter followed her every movement with his eyes, which now seemed to be popping out of his head. When she reached the kitchen door, she turned back and said, Let's not have any more argument. We'll compromise. He's a bunny, and we found him at a Dracula movie, so we'll call him Bunnicula. Bunnicula. That should make everybody happy, including me. What about me? Muttered Chatter. I won't be happy until she puts down that milk. Well, guys, is that okay with you? She asked. Toby and Pete looked at one another and at the rabbit, and smile grew on Toby's face. Yeah, Mom. I think that name is just right. Pete shrugged. It's okay, but I get to feed it. Okay, I'm gonna put the milk back in the fridge. Maybe we'll drink it tomorrow. What about Chatter? Toby said, dropping the print cat to the floor. He would like it. Chatter made a beeline for Mr. Monroe and looked up at her plaintively. Oh, Chatter doesn't want any more milk, do you, Chatter? You've already had your milk today. She reached down, patted Chatter on his head, and walked into the kitchen. Chatter didn't move. Okay, bedtime, said Mrs. Monroe. Good night, Bunnicula, Toby said. Good night, Count Bunnicula, Pete said sarcastically. Whatever took to be Transylvanian accent. I may be wrong, but I thought that I saw a particular movement from the cage. Good night, Harold. Good night, Chatter. I licked Toby good night. Good night, smelly Harold. Good night, dumb Chatter. I drooled on Pete's foot. Mom, Harold drooled on my foot. Good night, Pete, Mrs. Monroe said with a great finality, and she came back into the living room, and then more calmly, Good night, Harold. Good night, Chatter. Mr. and Mrs. Monroe went up the stairs together. You know, dear, Mr. Monroe said, that was very clever. But Nicola, I could never have thought of a name like that. Oh, I don't know, Robert. She smiled as she put her arm through his. I think Prince is a lovely name, too. The room was quiet. Chatter was still sitting by the closed kitchen door in the state of shock. Slowly he turned to me. I wish they had named him Fluffy, was all he said. 자, 부분을 열심히 듣고 따라 읽었는데 어제보다는 또 좀 나아진 것 같습니다. 중간에 조금 놓치는 게 있는데 그게 이제 집중력이 조금만 흐트러지거나 딴 생각을 하면 제가 놓치는 것 같아요. 그래서 여기서 조금 더 이제 집중할 수 있는 노력을 할 수 있도록 하겠습니다. 자, 오늘은 여기까지 하도록 하겠습니다.